This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host.
Welcome everyone. This is the Meaningful Sport podcast, and I am your host, Noora Ronkainen. Meaningful Sport is a series of discussions on the why and how involvement in sport and physical activity can be an important part of a life worth living. We will also explore threats to meaningful engagement in sport and movement culture practices and ask questions about what we can learn about the human condition through our involvement in sport. The guests are leading scholars in human and social sciences of sport who will share their explorations in a scholarly as well as a personal context. If you are interested in the theme, you might also want to check out meaningfulsport.com. There you can find podcast show notes, read a blog, and access many resources for further explorations of meaningful sport. Welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy today's episode. I probably cannot overemphasize how much I look forward to our discussion today. In what follows, we will be thinking about what kind of being is the sporting human being, what kind of worldmaking takes place through sports, and what kind of thing is meaning, among other things. Our starting point is the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, but as we will hear, our guest today has made some important original contributions in extending Heideggerian thought and developing his own philosophy of the sporting human being. I could use the next half an hour just to list all the achievements of our guest, but since I believe we all benefit most from hearing what he has to say, I will keep it fairly brief. He's a Professor Emeritus who has been a foundational figure in developing and growing the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences to a world-leading sports science research university it is today. He has also served as a rector of the school from 1999 to 2005, before Sigmund Lowland took over, so I would say that sports philosophy has been very well represented at NIH as we know it by its Norwegian name. Our guest has published very extensively over several decades on philosophical questions in sport, but he has also conducted empirical research using more psychological and sociological approaches and has done some very interesting interdisciplinary work as well. So welcome, Professor Gunnar Breivik, and I'm really honored to have you in this podcast today.
Thank you.
I think we could spend the whole day talking about kind of the wide variety of work and the philosophical kind of questions that you have addressed in sport. But I think what would interest me the most, and I think hopefully also the listeners, would be to look at how you are using existential philosophy and especially the work of Heidegger to understand the sporting human being. You've been very productive in recent years using Heidegger's thought, of course earlier as well, but I think the recent paper that you wrote in Sport Ethics and Philosophy with the title The Sporting Exploration of the World Toward a Fundamental Ontology of the Sporting Human Being, that paper would be a very nice starting point for our discussion today. Would you maybe first provide us thoughts and kind of an outline of Heidegger's idea of being in the world and Heidegger's project in being and time? So what kind of being is the human being or Dasein for Heidegger?
Well, Heidegger's approach is in many ways different from a lot of Western philosophy the last 500 years, especially the analytic philosophers have started with sort of looking at the human individual being and focused on consciousness and how we deliberately try to figure out and think about our situation in the world. And that means that we focus on subjects, individuals, as opposed to an environment and the different objects in the world. And we have this split between subject and object. So the first thing that I think is very important with Heidegger, which is one of the big advantages of his way of thinking, is that he looks at the human being as involved from the start with the world. There is not this schism, this division between ourselves and the world, but we are immersed in the world, as he calls it. We are transcending from the start towards the world. So we are being in the world in the sense that it's impossible to separate us from the world, neither in thinking nor in behaving. We are being in the world. And this is not a sort of conscious or mental thing, but it's a bodily thing. Which is also probably wrong to say, because Heidegger wouldn't admit that we need to separate our minds from our bodies. But we are, as total human beings, immersed in the world, transcending towards the world. And this intimate contact with our surroundings, with our situations, our contexts, which is a big advantage, I think, in Heidegger's thinking, because he is then able to overcome the individualism and our separateness from the environment. And I think this is very fruitful in sport, because in sports we deal with different kinds of surroundings depending on the sport, and we are all the time in sports, in a situation, in a context, with a specific setup of rules and game situations. So the being in the world fits, this idea fits very well to the exploration and the study of how we are dealing in sport contexts.
You use in your article the term worldmaking in sport, or world-making through sport. What would that mean?
Well, Heidegger defines or thinks about world as not as sort of the natural scientific environment, but world is the sort of not the deliberate construction, but it is nevertheless the world as it is constructed, and it is experienced by our human way of being situated in a context, in a situation. So we talk about, for instance, the work world, the sports world, and so on. And that means that human beings are able to sort of live in more specific contexts, like sports. And a world is for Heidegger something that has sort of, say, a horizon, but there is also an interconnectedness where things and situations are fitting together in structures, and this gives opportunities for meanings of various kinds. So the world is sort of the meaning world. It's a world not deliberately created, but so to say, we have found it and we are living in it, but it's not the sort of natural world, but it's our human world, as Heidegger is thinking about. So in sport we have various ways of sort of say shaping and expanding on earlier models to develop new kind of sporting worlds. And I've always been interested in how human beings explore new context situations and thus create new sport situations and even quite new sports, like we have seen since the 1970s and 80s, we have all the new lifestyle sports, the extreme sports, and so on. And in other areas too, we are all the time expanding. We are casting new sport worlds.
And in your article, you are then kind of developing this fourfold. So there would be these four constitutive relations that you are developing to understand the ontological structure of different sports. So maybe we should move into these four relations.
Yeah. I was starting from Heidegger and his work in Being and Time. But I found that there are some things that are missing in Heidegger here, because Heidegger is focusing a lot on the Dasein and how we are concerned about our own situation in the world. He uses the German word Sorge, the concern in English. So we have this relation to ourselves and our own lives. We are able to take care and reflect and behave according to how we self-reflectively, not only consciously, but also unconsciously, we take care of our own situation in the world. And he's also sort of dealing with the environment in the sense of this world, the human world around us. But he's not much interested in the situation that Buber depicted, the I-you situation. So starting from Heidegger, I sort of ended up with four dimensions. It's the dimension characterized when I am in a situation where I'm taking care of myself, the I-me situation. And then I have the situation, there we have the situation where I look into the eyes of another person. It's the I-you situation. What's unique here is that there is an immediate response. There is an interaction between two agents. And this is different from the I-society situation, where we are not interacting with one specific person, but we are taking part as members of a group, and we are sort of they or we. So this is a situation where I take part in a sort of small group or society. So this is the third situation. And then the last one is where I interact with nature, natural environments of various kinds. It's the I-nature situations. And then if you look at sports, you can see that sports fit quite well into this sort of fourfold structure. You have the lonely marathon runner, who is an example of the I-me situation, or the gymnast. All the sports where you are not, it's not necessary to interact with other people in the specific situation that you are into. These sports are, sort of say, independent of the others, and the environment is very often stable or standardized, not always. And then you have the team sports, like soccer, like basketball, like volleyball, where it's about being part of a team, that you take specific positions on the team, specific roles, that you have to interact with others, and you have to interact with an opposing team, and so on. So these are sort of small fights or wars between teams, going back probably to the old hunters and gatherers fights with neighboring tribes. it's a situation quite different from the loneliness of the marathon runner. And then you have the I use situation where you look your opponent in the eyes. It's like in the wrestling where you are very close, and then in boxing where you are a little bit, there is a little bit more distance, and then you have tennis, where you have a longer distance between the opponents. But nevertheless, there is this single opponent there where you have to react to all the moves of the other opponent that is confronting you. And then you have the sports where it's essential and necessary that there is a natural environment, like in at least mountaineering. Indoor climbing wouldn't be a good example, but mountaineering, whitewater kayaking, skydiving, it's interaction with natural elements, and these elements do not react in the same way as the opponent in an IU sport, because the river is not fighting back, it's behaving according to its rules. But you have nevertheless to be able to handle surprises also in these sports, because there may be unforeseen dangers popping up. So we have sort of, I call this an ontological scheme, because it's situations that are quite different when it comes to how we are, how we need to be in these four different sporting situations. So that's the basic idea about the fourfold sort of model.
Yeah, I have been very inspired of the paper, and I have tried to think through in terms of some of the empirical data I have at the moment, like how I could maybe use that model to think about those relations in different sports. I think where I'm kind of easily getting stuck is kind of the I me and I nature relations are because, like you mentioned, a marathon runner, but if we just think of a runner who is running in the forest, is that I me, or is it I nature relation? And is it about the intention of the runner, or how do we kind of distinguish what is the primary relation that is possibly at play over there?
Yeah, you will have intermediary cases, like for instance, another example would be a relay in running, 4 times 100 meter or 4 times 400 meter. Is that a team sport, or is it an individual sport? There is individual runners at each part of the race, but they experience it probably as a sort of team. So this is an ideal typical, what I call ideal typical model, and there will be cases, specific sports that are sort of say intermediary. When it comes to your question about nature, there is a nice distinction made by Crane or Howe, I am not quite sure. You can distinguish between nature-based sports where, for instance, like orienteering or running in the woods, they are based in a sense on a natural environment, but they are not nature directed, which is so there is a distinction between nature-based and nature-directed. Nature-directed sports are sports where the focus is on handling, reacting to natural elements of some kind. Like skydiving, you have to react to the pressure of the air in the river. You have, as a whitewater kayaker, you have to react to the waves, the streams, the various rocks that pop up and so on. So the focus is on the natural element. where in other nature-based sports, the natural element is, so to say, a part of an environment that you have to handle, but your focus is not necessarily on the element per se, but focused on going as fast as possible or winning or whatever. So, and you can even divide this further. So, but there are intermediary cases, but that is also in situations, for instance, in a situation in a team sport, you may oppose a single agent or actor. You may stand opposite a player that you have trying to dribble, or you are a defender and you try to oppose the dribbler. That's sort of in a part of the game, you are then in an IU situation, but the overall situation is a team situation. So there may be specific situations sort of that come and that represent a different part of my fourfold model. So it's not clean in that sense. I think life is in many ways, our divisions are very often fuzzy with no quite clear borders, but nevertheless you have, so to say, some main structures, some main lines to draw, but there will be intermediary cases and fuzzy borders.
And because you have also done a lot of empirical research in a more psychological and sociological setting, and if somebody wanted to kind of take this fourfold as a foundation for thinking about sport, what would be the kind of things that you think could be done with your foundational work and how to build upon it?
Well, I would be very interested in testing this model first to interview people in representing the four different types of sport and try to find out how they experience the sport, whether this model is really sort of functioning well when it comes to say something about their own experiences, or maybe this structure is, so to say, a structure on a deeper level, so that they will not consciously experience that they are, say, in a team sport, experiencing the team in the same way as I am depicting it and describing it in my analysis. So it would be interesting to see how if a sort of model developed by philosophical analysis, but also my own experience from these sports, of course, whether that fits very well with the experiences, the factual experiences of athletes in these different sports. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. And do you think it's a problem if people don't? It's what you're saying, these are the foundational relations, and people might not recognize them when they start talking about that. Do you think that's a problem or not?
Well, not necessarily, because it's the same way with Heidegger's philosophy, that, for instance, his analysis of Dasein and Dasein is not the conscious human being experiencing the world, but Dasein is more fundamental. And people would probably not experience, many people at least, would not experience themselves in the way that Heidegger describes the Dasein's relation to the world, because it's on a deeper level. So to say, it's more fundamental. It's sort of transcendental in the sense that Heidegger is showing the necessary conditions that something is to take part on a deeper level, but people need not consciously experience the world in this way, or the sport in this way. So we must accept that there are deeper structures, layers. It's the same. I have also been interested in the theory, philosophy of mind, and the problem of consciousness, and it's the same here. There are a lot of things going on that is not conscious, but it's fundamental, it's important, it's a necessary condition for things to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good clarification in terms of thinking through this model and what it represents. I think then it would be quite nice to move to this question about meaning. So what is meaning and what is meaningful experience? That's kind of the topic of our series of the podcasts. So yeah, let's move to that in Heidegger's thought. What is meaning?
Yeah. I will then start with what Heidegger is describing in Being and Time, the situation in the carpenter shop, where things are experienced as pieces of equipment. For instance, if the purpose or the goal, the intention is to build a house, you'll see that the hammer, the nails, the planks, the building of a wall, the building of the whole house has a purpose, that of having a house where people can live. And the purpose of having a place to live is to lead a life that is meaningful in some sense. But the basic meaning is, for Heidegger first, that things hang together. They are structured. The nails, the hammer, the planks, they refer, as Heidegger say, to each other. They have something to do with each other. They are pieces of equipment in a context. So when we in daily situations, and these types of situations are the most fundamental according to Heidegger. For instance, the hammer. The most fundamental way of experiencing the hammer is not to describing the hammer as a sort of an object with a certain size and color and weight and so on. This is the theoretical and inspection of the world, so to say. But the fundamental way of being in the world is to use things as pieces of equipment in a context. And this relational structure that Heidegger describes very well is also the structure we have in sport, where the ball, the field, the lines, the goalposts, the net, the players, they sort of fit together, they hang together, they are structured with a specific purpose, that of playing football according to the rules in order to win a game according to a set of rules. So that's meaning in a fundamental sense, that things are functioning together, structured in a specific ways with a sort of purpose. And if we move then to the human being in the world, the human being, says Heidegger, has also this concern, as he called it. We all know that we are living, and we know in a deep sense what it is about, and it is about to take care of our existence in the world. And our daily world is structured according to this fundamental purpose of life, which may be quite different for different persons, of course, but the same structure is seen because it's all about this deep concern about leading a life. And this life may then have different specific meanings, but meaning in a fundamental sense is this structuring. And even deeper, or if you want higher level, Heidegger takes up this in situations where, and this is the second part of Being and Time, where he takes up the situations where we have possibility to experience sort of more what he calls eigentlich, which is we can live in basically in two different ways. We can find meaning in our daily lives by doing as all the other people do. Heidegger calls this das Man. We do what all the others do. This daily living is full of it is not sort of honest living. It's living on a very superficial level, where we are not living according to our deeper and deepest instincts, so to say. So there are, according to Heidegger, specific situations where you have the possibility of, so to say, to get in contact with this deepest parts of your being. It's about finding an authentic way of leading a life and not living superficially and doing what all the other people do, but it's to finding the deepest parts of your own relation to living. And that's exposed for Heidegger in specific situations like anxiety. Distinction is made by Heidegger and also other existentialist philosophers between fear and anxiety. Fear is when you fear something specific. For instance, the bear is attacking you, and you have this specific danger that is approaching you. But anxiety is a situation where, so to say, there is no specificity. There is nothing specific that's attacking you. It's just something that is impossible to identify and define. And that's what's so scaring. It's just the floor is slipping away under your feet, and you are falling. And this slipping away is related then to anxiety. And anxiety for Heidegger is especially possible to experience in situations where you are confronting death. It's your own death. It's not dying as a sort of general human experience, but it is your death. And we are all the time living towards our own death. And this experience being towards death is then a way of being confronted with the fear of nothingness. And that means, of course, anxiety. And there are also situations that could be possible to develop this honest approach to life, this authentic approach to life, like he thinks about Langeweile, when you are bored, and it could be in specific situations of love and so on, but anxiety is his favorite example. And I use this in sports also, because in sports you have also the possibility of meeting situations not only that are characterized by fear, but are characterized by anxiety.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in the show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcast or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.